Now, we see in the period 1903 to 1914, the great St. Pius X, the Pope of our church, and he and his Secretary of State, Cardinal Merry del Val, who was an Englishman, by the way, with a Spanish name, they were great foes of modernism. Modernism and Masonry are, in many respects, the same thing. They came out with the encyclical, the Pope's encyclical Pascendi in 1910, condemning modernism. Right? You have to know about that. I can't dwell on it, haven't got time. But you have to know that modernism is a problem. Now, they also tried to clean house. They got rid of several priests. Priests were excommunicated. You were a modernist, you're out of here, right? One of the priests who was excommunicated was a man named George Tyrrell. And he said, I don't know if this is exactly what he said, I don't have the exact quote, but he said, "Not all have been dealt with, we shall return even stronger," right? So what he was saying and what the Pope knew was that they hadn't cleaned the house completely. They did a good job. They bought us time, I guess we could say. Now, in 1978, right in the middle of the 34-day papacy of Pope John Paul I, he only lived 34 days as a pope, a magazine came out in Italy called Osservatore Politico. The date is there, September 22, 1978. And the headline in the article was La Gran Loggia Vaticana, right? The Grand Lodge of the Vatican. And the man had published this information asking the Vatican to respond. Within his article, he's quoting from an Italian magazine, Il Messaggero, and it said this. It said, "For the first time in history of modern Masonry, a pope has not died in a state of hostilities with Masonry," meaning Paul VI. Paul VI, evidently, to these people, was obviously not hostile to Masonry. Well, the article was written by a man named Mino Pecorelli. And Pecorelli said in his article, "Let us either have a deluge of denials or, if there is silence, a purgation, a getting rid of these people." Now, what did they publish in this article? They published the names of over 120 prelates of the Catholic Church, their dates of entry into Masonry, and their code names. The article is headlined, La lista di presunti masoni. I'm not very good at Italian, but anyway, the list of the presumed or alleged Masons, right? So Pecorelli was asking the Vatican to respond. Who's on the list? Well, I've mentioned some of the names, 120, I couldn't put them all on the list. Villot was the Secretary of State, Cardinal Villot. Bunini is the man who was assigned by Paul VI to restructure the Mass and come up with the Novus Ordo. Marcinkus was the head of the Vatican Bank. Sunins was a major figure in Vatican II. Levi was with Osservatore Romano, the Vatican's newspaper. And Bea was the man that Malachi Martin worked for. And Malachi Martin told me personally, I got friendly with him as well, that he was no good. Put it mildly, he was no good. All right, so the article appeared. All right, now what happened? Remember now, this is right in the middle of the 34-day papacy of Pope John Paul I. He reigned for a mere 34 days. The article appeared right then. Did Pope John Paul I intend to look into the charges about Masonry? I think so. I don't know. I think so. But 2 weeks later, he was dead. There was no autopsy. Cardinal Villot, who was on the list, took personal charge of everything, cleaned up the papal apartments. If he had done that in the United States, he might have been prosecuted for disturbing a potential crime scene. But nothing was done. We live in the age of cover-ups, right? The cover-up of the death of John Kennedy, the cover-up of the shoot-down of KAL 007 with Congressman Larry McDonald aboard, the cover-up here, the cover-up, here's a beautiful cover-up right here, right? And they got away with it. Now, what about Masonry? It was condemned by Pope Clement in 1738. It's been condemned by all subsequent popes up until John 23rd. Every pope issued a condemnation of Masonry. Now, I want to make the point that Masonry in Europe is far more revolutionary than what we know of Masonry here in the United States. I'm not excusing the leaders of Masonry in the United States. In the United States and in the West, the high percentage of Masons are victims of leaders, not conspirators, not even aware of the overall goal of their sect. I asked a man that I knew one time who was a Mason. I said to him, does Masonry keep you away from religion? And he thought about that a minute, and he said, it becomes a substitute for religion. And he finally said, yeah, you're right about that, it does. I said, well, then it's subversive. Very simple, right? So now Masonry supports the idea of world government, the United Nations. All right, now we're getting into the second part of my talk, right? Masonry, the revolution, said Fogazzaro of the larger Milan in about the year 1900, the revolution will have to be brought about in the name of obedience, right? Catholic people are obedient, and so we can do this, and we can do this, and we can do this, and we can accomplish the revolution because the Catholic people are obedient. So I wrote an article called Catholic Obedience, When You Do, When You Don't, When You Resist, right? As you should. Now, I don't suppose there are too many who have ever heard of Father Luigi Villa. Well, somebody has. He was a disciple of Padre Pio. Well, Padre Pio died in 1968. Before Padre Pio passed away, he went to Father Villa, and he gave him an assignment. I want you to catalog the writings and statements of John 23rd, who had already himself passed away, Paul VI, who was reigning as Pope, and the successors. So Father Villa did that very faithfully. He died in early 2003, just recently, right? And he published books about John 23rd, another book about Paul VI, another book about John Paul II. He didn't do one on John Paul I. 34 days, there wasn't much to write about. And those books are available from a group called Our Lady of Good Success in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. Let me tell you that the books are devastating, right? And they should be known. The Catholic people need to know how we've been betrayed.